Hey everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to Attitude's weekly ADHD Experts broadcast. I'm Susan Kaufman. I'm here for Attitude. Today we'll be talking with Rick Fiery of Inventive Labs about helping teens and young adults with ADHD and other related conditions find their path after high school and beyond. The leap from high school to college can be tough. It's simply following, the guidance counselors, career suggestions, or taking the college path because it's what's always done. It just rarely leads to success. So Rick Fiery will talk about why college is not the only option after high school and why career success may well follow a different path. He'll talk about how to help your student find their passion, the foundation for any successful career, as well as a variety of other options available after high school, gap year, career training, entrepreneurship, and other options. So let me introduce Rick Fiery first and thank him so much for giving us his time today. He is an MS MBA, the co-founder of Inventive Labs in Amesbury, Massachusetts. He created with his co-founder, Tom Bergeron, Inventive Labs to help young adults with learning differences find alternative paths to success, paths such as gap years and entrepreneurship programs. You may well be interested in watching Rick's TEDx presentation for more details. I think you'll find it fascinating. Prior to Inventive Labs, Rick was the CEO of a number of startup companies that he created and grew before selling them to strategic buyers. He has a bachelor's and a master's in civil engineering from the University of Virginia, as well as an MBA from the Wharton School of Business. So join me in welcoming Rick Fiery today. And Rick, we so much appreciate your time. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me on.
We're thrilled. As always with Attitude broadcasts, Rick Fiery will present his slides and then take as many questions as time permits. Before he starts his presentation, we'd like to ask you to complete a brief poll. Our question today is, are you joining this webinar as the parent of a child with ADHD or a person looking for a career path or for another reason? And if there's another reason, please jot it into the Q&A format so we can see it. This will be really helpful to Rick as he tailors his presentation to meet your interests. While you're completing the poll, let me remind you that you can download the presentation slides right now in the resource list widget. Some people like to download them, take notes. You may also resize the widgets on your screen if you choose. This webinar is probably bandwidth intensive, so please close any browser sessions that may be running in the background. If you don't have enough bandwidth, you will experience some audio problems, and we don't want that. So with that, let's see what the poll results are. And I will wait to see what those are. Oh, okay. So 82% of you are the parent of a child with ADHD. If you could jot in the Q&A, it would be great. The age of your child, or is your child in high school, older? Just tell us a little bit about your interest in being here. That would be super helpful for us. And with that, let me turn it over to Rick. Rick, again, thanks so much for being here today.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me. I first wanted to start with folks and explain my background because it's a little bit different. As you saw in my bio, I'm not a therapist. I'm really not a psychologist. Really not. I am not a psychologist. So keep that in mind as you listen to my perspective. My views are really observational from experience of 5 years of working with individuals with learning differences such as ADHD and growing up with them around me, and maybe even one myself. We can talk about that more later. And my background is really from the business side of the equation. I've created software businesses, I've done startups, and I was CFO of a $350 million company at one point. And my viewpoint is really as an employer that gets ADHD. So I think that's important for you to understand as I kind of talk through this. And I always like to lead with a story. And I know a few people have potentially clicked through and seen the TEDx talk that I gave. So I'm going to change that story up a little bit and give you a little bit more information. But really, these are the folks that we're talking about. These are the game changers. So I would start with a number of years ago. I was running a software startup company, and we were in just absolute desperate need of talented developers for our company. We were going against some pretty big companies, publicly traded companies, and trying to take them on head to head as a small company. And I challenged our development team, actually our whole company, to reach out into the community and try to find people that could come in and do some hardcore coding for us, write some very detailed software. And what happened was a young man came up to me and said, hey, Rick, I know this guy who was probably the brightest kid in my high school class. He went off to college, and for some reason, he's back home. He didn't make it through. But he is probably the best coder I've ever seen in my life. He can code things that nobody has ever seen. Now, he doesn't have a college degree. Will you hire him? And my answer was, of course, it doesn't matter to me whether he has a college degree. It's can he code? So bring him on in and let's see what he can do. Needless to say, this guy came in and started coding circles around everybody. He was absolutely fantastic. He was very shy and very introverted, but he could code like there was no tomorrow. And time went on, and sure enough, unfortunately, 6 months down the road, about 6 months, the head of engineering came in to me and said, Rick, we have a problem. We have to let this guy go. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? This guy is doing things that we need done. What's going on? And he said, well, let me describe what it's like. He shows up at 11 o'clock in the morning, and the rest of our development team starts at 8 o'clock. He refuses to fix his bugs. So for those of you that don't code, those are issues with software that when you write code, it crashes and doesn't work. He refuses to fix those bugs because he says that's boring. He also refuses to document his code and explain what he did, because apparently that's boring too. So we can't have that in a development team. We have to let him go. So I always ask folks, what would you have done in that situation? What would you have done? Well, if the answer was fire him, I think we could end the webinar right now, right? The answer was not that. I looked at the head of engineering and I said, look, I'm not thinking of letting him go. I'm thinking of letting you go. And his eyes got real big at that point. And I said, no, I'm not going to let you go, but you got to start thinking outside the box. Let's do something different here. Let's try to build a culture of talent. Let's allow him to continue doing what he's doing, but let's hire a bug fixer. And if you want to hire a bug fixer from college, that's fine. Bring them in. Let them come and they will learn more in 6 months of fixing this guy's bugs than they ever did in college. This is real world stuff. Also, let's hire a documenter and somebody to come in and document code for them. Again, same story. They'll learn more in 6 months documenting what this guy's doing than they ever would have learned in college. And then finally, let's do this. Let's let them work whatever hours they want as a team. Who cares? So the end result of that story is the team did fantastically, but kind of an unexpected benefit was the rest of the team saw this and they started to say, I don't like writing new code. I like fixing bugs. Can I do that? And we said, yes, just do that. And I don't like writing new code. I like documenting code. Can I do that? Yes, just do that. And I like writing new code. So the whole team kind of morphed and we became much more efficient as a result. So in my opinion, and I think you'll agree, this young man was brilliant and he was necessary for what we were trying to do. So the rest of that story is that young man is now no longer young, like I used to be young at the time. And he has been working at the same company for 25 years now and got married and has kids and, has moved on and done very well for himself. So that's the prelude. And what I wanted to point out to you again, that these are the game changers. And that's what we're talking about today. So before I dive into kind of the heavy part of the presentation here, which is talking about colleges and careers, I think you got to take a step back and we got to talk about why. Just the question, why? I'm sure some of you are smiling a little bit right now, but with ADHD, the importance of why and trying to figure out your path and your career is just a very, very important question. So think about it. As parents, I saw that over 80% of the people on the webinar are parents of ADHD kids. How many times have you been asked, why do I have to do all this homework if I can get A's on all the tests, right? Why do I have to write a report about Moby Dick if I'm going to be a scientist? Or why do I have to write a research paper if I want to be a musician? And what's our typical answer to that? I don't know. My answer was not very good. It was because. And because is a really bad answer to people with ADHD. If they don't know why they need to do something, they're not going to do it, right? It's just not going to happen no matter how hard you push. You could try, but if they do know the why, right, stand back. Then they can be off to the races. So how do you find the why? And, you need to help them figure out why they're going to explore a career, or why they might consider college, or why they might take a certain career path. You got to think like a business person to figure out why. Ask, what is the goal and what are we trying to achieve? If you can figure those things out, then you know the why. So in business, you define the goal you're trying to achieve, like create a product. And if everyone on the team believes in the goal, then tasks get defined and everyone dives in to achieve the goal. And extraneous tasks are ruthlessly weeded out to achieve the goal. So this is what the ADHD mind wants. That's what they like. Education in college is not like that. You need to do what you're being told to do because, and this is what you need to do to get the degree. And that doesn't really compute with folks. It can be a challenge for them to understand it. So if they know why, then success may happen. They find a purpose, the hyperfocus can kick in. In a lot of cases, as long as the goal is known and the reasoning is believable, then stuff happens, right? If you can see the goal and there's a reason to do it, then things can happen. So simply allowing the conveyor belt to roll and hope that the light bulb will go on in college can be a risky and expensive proposition without knowing the why. So let's talk about success for a second. We can probably all agree that if college is attainable in today's day and age, it offers the most opportunity for our kids. That's kind of the way it's been designed. Think about it. We get put on this conveyor belt to college starting in the first grade. And at the end of the day, the goal is to get people into college. Colleges promote it. The government helps pay for it in some cases. Scholarships are available. It's a conveyor belt to push people off the edge into college, and that's the goal. It's nearly ingrained in everybody that that's the way. And with ADHD, there is a challenge to college. That's just the reality of it. Is it achievable if you have ADHD? Yes, but I kind of say time out a second. I bet many of you are maybe starting to think, oh, good, now he's going to tell me how to get my kid into college and through college. I am, but I'm probably not going to do it the way that you think. I'm going to try to change that mindset a bit today, that hope is not usually a strategy. And I imagine you are all here because you are concerned about the future and your gut is screaming that another approach may be needed to get your son or your daughter through college. So let's pause and take a deep breath and think. And we do this a lot with folks. They don't like the pauses because it gets boring. But pause and take a deep breath and think about what your definition of success is. Now, some of you might say college equals success. I mean, maybe before I even started this presentation, you would have said that. But if I asked for people raising hands now, I bet not as many people would raise their hands. Many are probably shaking your head and saying no. But if you go to the proverbial cocktail party, right, today, when anyone's talking about any college-age young adults, what are the questions? It's constant. Where are you going to go to college? Have you thought about college? Have you applied yet? What's your major going to be? How are you enjoying it? That's the dialogue that happens with folks. And I think we got to start questioning that. We have to change the mindset. The goal is a career, should be a career. A college degree is a means to get to that career. So the goal should not be a college degree. The goal should be, I wish I had a drum roll. I think it's obvious. It's not, you don't really need a drum roll for this. The goal should be a career that they can enjoy and provide excitement every day. So that's the important part. Some people can slog through a career where they're making a ton of money and they're sitting in a cube and they know they can just grind it out, but they're making a ton of money. That can be a challenge for the ADHDer. So it's got to be something enjoyable and can provide excitement every day. And that takes a little bit of work to find. As parents, one of the bullet points that in the presentation was, how can you be supportive? I think one of the key things is to change the mindset from how do I get my son or my daughter into college to how do I find them a career that best fits them? The goal should be that. The goal shouldn't be college. They don't get time in a high school to figure this out. Let's be real. A lot of them are just surviving and trying to complete the assignments on time and staying up late till 2 a.m. writing for papers that are due the next day or at 5 a.m. or worse, right? Pulling all-nighters in high school. They don't have time to figure out the why. So as parents, kind of changing the tone and the mindset, reducing the anxiety level is, let's talk about fun stuff. Let's talk about the goal and not college. Again, what is the path to success? Well, start with the career and the associated vision of success, and then figure out the path to get there. So let's break this down a little bit and talk about, how you go about maybe working through this process to figure out the career at the end that can get, your son or your daughter excited. So if I look at how to find the perfect career, it's like business. Again, I look at this from the business lens. You got to be methodical. If you just kind of hope and Google and push and prod, it's not going to happen. You got to be methodical to make it happen. And to hone in on a success, take a list of passions, of things that you're excited about. Just write them down on one sheet of paper, on another sheet of paper. And maybe these are the same things that you're passionate about. On another sheet of paper, list things that you can make money at. So something that people are going to pay you for. Finally, list some things that you can become really good at, that you can become world-class at, that you can become, one of the top people in the field or the industry. And if you can get to that intersection, the sweet spot, then the intersection of those three things are things that maybe somebody should be pursuing as kind of that dream career. So you might have a passion for chasing bunnies in the woods, right? But I was going to say nobody. There's probably somebody out there that'll pay you to chase bunnies through the woods, but it's unlikely. So some of those things fall in the outer ring of passion. But if you become a really good app developer and you can code apps really fast, there are people out there that'll pay you money for that. So that kind of gives you an idea on how to think of this. And I have to laugh. This is a Venn diagram, right? I think the last time I used the term Venn diagram was probably 5th or 6th grade in that particular context. So I guess I have used some of the things that I learned in those kind of environments. But this is not rocket science. In fact, I think if you Google how to find a career path, you'll see some examples of this, but it has a different flavor for people with ADHD. So how do you find a passion? That's the hardest thing out there. But we've kind of distilled it down to the only way to find a passion is to actively try things. You got to try things. That's how you find out if you're passionate about it. A lot of folks will like to Google their way to a passion and say, wow, I'd love to be a Twitch streamer on TV, on the internet, or a YouTuber or something like that. But if you haven't tried it and you see how much work it is to edit the videos, 2 minutes of video is like 10 hours of editing in some cases to make this stuff. If you haven't actually tried it, you don't know if you're truly passionate about it. You think you are, but you don't know. So the only way to really find a passion is to actively try things. To me, summer jobs are crucial. That's my story. I started out as a mechanical engineer because my high school guidance counselor said, you're good at math and science. Therefore, you should go be an engineer. I looked down the list of engineering fields and I said, well, that's the one I like, mechanical engineering. And I went off to college at the University of Virginia and started out. And I survived my core courses for 2 years, got into the third year of my major and said, uh-oh, I really don't like this. And I would have been in deep, deep trouble if I didn't have a summer job that I had, because I had a summer job in the mountains of West Virginia with a machete. I was cutting my way down, up and down mountains, creating survey lines for surveying out in the field. And that to me was awesome. I got to be outside, outdoors, seeing the project. Then I go inside and do the calculations and create the plans for the project. And I got to do that as a summer job, and I loved it. It was a mix. It worked for me. The work environment was good. I liked being outdoors. All that stuff worked. And I looked at myself in my third year and looked at civil engineering, and I said, I'm interested in all those courses. Why am I here? And I switched majors, and it took me 5 years to get through. Now, back then, in-state tuition at the University of Virginia was a lot cheaper than it is now. So that fifth year wasn't a huge deal. Even though I remember that conversation with my dad, that wasn't so good. But in any event, summer jobs are crucial. Summer experiential camps are awesome. There's coding camps. My son went to a coding camp at MIT and really learned whether or not he liked software coding. You think you might, but until you do it, you don't really know. There's also acting camps, entrepreneurship camps, cooking camps, all kinds of things that in the off time from school when academics are kind of overwhelming, filling those summer positions, those summertime experiences with real experiential type exercises can really help people figure out what they want. Volunteer positions are good too. If you can't get a job and you can't find the camp or you can't afford the camps that are out there, go volunteer somewhere. We had a young man that came here into one of our programs, and he counted horseshoe crabs on the beach in the summer and created data for some research that was going on. Loved it. And is now moving into a different field related to research and the environment. So you got to try things. That's the thing that I'd say about finding your passion. Money. All right. So this is an interesting one. So I think the younger generation and even older generations, money's a challenge to kind of understand conceptually sometimes. How much is enough money? And you got to start by discussing the lifestyles that somebody might want. So with your son or daughter or with yourself, do I want to be in a mansion or do I want to be in a tent? Some people can only be happy in a mansion. Some can only be happy in a tent. But you got to understand, what are you aiming for? Again, it's kind of the business view of this. All right, what's my goal? Well, I need to make money. How much money do I need to make? What kind of lifestyle do I want? The eye-opening thing is then have them create a living budget. List out all the expenses. A car. How much does it cost to have a car? And don't forget the maintenance. Everyone always forgets about that. How much does gas cost? How much does insurance cost? How much does an apartment or a house or a tent or a mansion cost? How much does food really cost? What about medical? When you turn 26, be on the parent's medical plan anymore. So add all those costs up and then ask them the question, and this is usually entertaining. Well, what job are you going to work? Well, I'm going to go do this job and it's going to be cool. How much are you going to make? $15 an hour. Take the total expenses, right, divided by the hourly rate, and that gives you how many hours you need to work per month to make that happen. And when they see 300 hours a week becomes the answer, that could be eye-opening. So it's a great exercise just to get people to understand the cost of money. And then the funny thing, one conversation I had with one of my kids is, and then guess what? Then they take taxes out of that. And they're like, they can't do that. Well, yeah. They do. So you have to work even more hours? Yes, you have to work more hours. So it's interesting, the dynamics that happen when you have that conversation. I would say consider making The Millionaire Next Door mandatory reading for your kids, or read it yourself and maybe explain it to them. It's about consumption versus non-consumption, saving versus spending. And many people now are very into non-consumerism. That's kind of a thing. And this book is about that. Even though it's several years old, it still has that same point to it. So I think that's a great book for people to understand. And what you see as these great success stories isn't always what's the reality. So money is an important thing to talk about. Now, the last thing is becoming world class. That's the hard one. With ADHD, it requires some brutal honesty sometimes, right? You know, people can be so passionate about wanting to do something, but if they can never be good at it, then it's something that should come off the list. And that's hard to do sometimes. But for myself, well, let me give you an example. So somebody that says they want to be an English major, but they can't write and they hate writing, that's probably not a good match. It happens. I wanted to be a fighter pilot. That's what I wanted to be when I was a kid. I made models. I was obsessed. But then I found out when I was 16 or 17, I was colorblind. And then I further found out that if you're colorblind, you can't be a fighter pilot or a commercial pilot. So that's just something I can't do. I had to take it off my list. I was passionate about it. I could make good money at it, especially if I went onto the airlines, but I couldn't do it. So it had to come off the list. I also can't sing. So I can't be the rock star up on the stage. That would have been cool too. So sometimes you have to be ruthless about taking the dreams and the passions off. It's okay to have them off to the side as something that they can do, in their spare time because they love it, but it's not necessarily going to be the way they can make the money and get to that mansion or that tent, whatever their goal is. So the other thing I would say is that sometimes the passion levels are so high that you almost need to let them try and fail. You have to be the judge of that, but it might be that fine, if you really want to go into that college and that major, I'm going to let you try, but it's a really tough slog. And if it's their dream, you sometimes have to do that, and it can be hard to watch, but that's a tougher call there. So basically, work through all those things and then come up with that intersection, and then start building a career list, and consider alternative careers as well. So here's an example of just throwing out some crazy career ideas. These are what we call passion-based careers. And this might be that, somebody's very excited about this. It may be difficult to confirm income in some of these things. Some of them you can. And these are examples of things that people that have come through our programs have actually gravitated to. So, fashion designer, conceptual artist, Twitch streamer, video game designer. Those are things that people can be very passionate about. And with the right paths, you can find your way through to it and make it happen. And I'll give some examples of that later. Examples of non-traditional careers, things that you should consider. It's not always doctor, dentist, lawyer, architect, marketer, web designer. Those are more traditional type careers. Sometimes you got to think outside the box. We had a young woman that came to one of our programs, and she was very interested in art and liked helping people, but she couldn't figure out what direction she wanted to go in college. And when she figured out that being an art therapist was a thing, the light bulb went on. And she kind of found her path from there. Other things that are outside the box are fishing charter captain. Again, love being on the ocean, but you can create a business out of it and make some money at it doing what you love. What the heck? Why not do that? You don't have to fit into the standard box. And with ADHDers, you have to think potentially outside the box to find that passionate job that they can dive into. And at first glance, you might say, well, you can't make money at that. I challenge that. I think if you become world class in something, you can start to make money at it. So next step. So I'm giving you a little bit of a methodology here. You've kind of come up with a list of potential careers and paths. You got to pick several careers and start to look at the passion match, whether it's something that's really, really something passion that somebody can get passionate about, what the educational requirements are for it. If you want to be a doctor, you got to go to college and you got to get an MD. So that's just the way it is. If you want to do something different like coding, a software coder, you may not need to go to college. It helps, absolutely, but you may not need to. Then look at the skills that you need to build. If you can get excited about building those skills and they aren't too daunting, then it kind of stays on the list. Job environment is a big one. If it's a construction job that starts at 7 a.m. and your son and daughter can't get up before 10 or 11 o'clock to save their lives, that's probably not a good match. So again, start to look in more detail at the careers. And then finally, location. It may need to be, if you want to be a singer-songwriter, it's LA or New York City and Nashville. Those are mainly the areas that you're going to be looking at. Sometimes you have to put yourself in a place to be, opportunistic and find that path to success. So consider that kind of research. And then once you've narrowed down maybe a few companies, which is what we really encourage. Don't just say, I want to be an engineer. Figure out what engineering firm you want to work for. Or if you want to be a game designer, figure out what kind of, let me switch and I'm going to show you LinkedIn for a second here. So hopefully right now you guys can see my LinkedIn page. It says it's sharing on my screen. And this is Hasbro. So if somebody wants to work for Hasbro, here's the power tip. Go down to people. And if you click on people, up pops something very interesting. I don't know if you know this, but there are 6,879 employees in Hasbro, and this is where they live. You can see a great number in the Providence, Rhode Island area, but they're scattered all around the world. And more interestingly, potentially, is this is where they studied. So now that you've gotten down to the career level, hey, I'd love to work as a game designer at a place like Hasbro. Now you can start to figure out back to front maybe where you should go to college, right? And if you click on University of Rhode Island, then you get all the people that worked at Hasbro that went to the University of Rhode Island. And then you can click on somebody and see what they did. Now, you always say in the internet, be careful what you put on the internet. So sorry, Kelly, you're first. You just became an example. And if I click on Kelly, she's a digital asset administrator at Hasbro. You can see what she does and what she does on a daily basis. You can see what her background is. She started out with a degree in libraries, Master of Library and Information Science, and she's working at Hasbro. So again, it shows you a path that somebody took, where they went to school and how they went to Hasbro, and then what kind of skills they have that caused them to hire them. So to me, that is a really interesting way of looking at how to do this. So now, hopefully I'm back and you can see my LinkedIn power tip. It's really a roadmap on how to get hired to work in any company. So pick the company, do the research, and work backwards. It's a great, great tool. So now at this point, you can start to consider your next steps, right? So let's say that Hasbro is the example. So Hasbro, you know that maybe going to the University of Rhode Island is a path that you want to take and go into higher education and do the 4-year college. Gap year might be something that you do if you get to the end of high school and you really don't know what your career path is. There are tremendous gap year opportunities. I'm going to talk about each one of these individually in a second. Consider an internship where you go and get some job experience. Again, find the why before you go off to college or before you spend the time and money in a career. Job training, if coding is your thing, there are other ways to get coding experience, as an example. And then finally, entrepreneurship, which I think I have to qualify this. Everyone says, "Ooh, entrepreneurship, that's risky," right? It's risky. Oh, it's scary. Guess what? If you take an ADHDer and they survive college and you throw them in a work environment where it's cubes and 8 to 5 every day, that can be risky too. So risk is always relative. One of my passions is I'm a private pilot, so I can't be a commercial or a fighter pilot, but I can fly during the daylight hours with my color blindness. And being a pilot is all about balancing risk and making risk decisions and minimizing the risk and picking your path that you're going to take, minimizing the risk. That's what being a pilot is all about, a successful, safe pilot. So entrepreneurship can be a thing for folks. So looking at higher education, don't always think that it has to be the 4-year degree, residential, go with all the other kids. That can work for some folks. But if you're concerned about that, there are commuter options, which you don't get quite the college experience, but sometimes you have to make compromises. Consider community college first. The great thing about community college is you don't have to take 18 hours a semester to get through it. You can spread it out if you need to, because sometimes with the executive functioning challenges, that 18 hours or 15 hours or even 12 hours can be daunting, right? So community college first, it's less expensive. You figure out your passions before you dive in and do the hardcore, last few years of the degree. And you can do it in a supportive environment as well. Online options are a thing. Some people love online. I don't like it so much, but some people do. And then don't forget night school. Sometimes working in a career during the day in a career path that you want to take motivates you at night. While I was at school to pay for my 5th year that I had to pay for, I worked almost full time for an engineering firm, and everything I learned during the day in college, in the afternoon I went in and I used it in my engineering job. And it was this feeding frenzy. I mean, I kept learning, using, learning, using, learning, using. So sometimes night school is a good option for that, something to consider. So when you think college, it doesn't have to be the big bite of the apple all the time. Secondly, gap year. Consider a gap year to explore potential career options. Colleges like this now. Many of them will promote it. Many will let you get in and defer for a year while you go do a gap year so that you can figure out your major. And quite honestly, from our perspective, figure out if it's the right college before you commit fully to it. You might lose a deposit, but in the scheme of life, that's small money to lose in case you change your mind. So consider a gap year to explore potential career options. Most importantly, you get to build maturity and independence and life skills, etc., without the crush of academics happening concurrently. So I got a 15 or 18-hour course load. I'm having to learn how to cook, learn how to do my laundry. Oh, I forgot to do my laundry, and I've got a final exam tomorrow. I got to shower. Working all those executive functioning things into a very packed schedule can be a challenge. So learning some of those skills first in a gap year before you go off to college can be a really good thing. And my last piece of advice on gap years is avoid the see the world gap years. For many people, that's fantastic. For people that are non-ADHD, that's great. You send off ADHDers on a see the world gap year, they're going to come back with even more ideas. So it's a great vacation, but I'm not sure it's as productive. I think for ADHDers, they really need to focus on figuring out the why for college. Internships are a thing. Many companies are now embracing diversity. Chief diversity officers exist. Internships exist for people that are not in college. It's a great way to try a career before you're investing heavily in training time or education. We've been reaching out and talking to companies about internships and kind of pointing out to them that if you hire people into your internships just from colleges, which is what, if you go Google careers and click on internship, you must be in a 4-year program to apply for this. I point out to them, you're getting a certain kind of brain type, a certain kind of person. You're missing out on potentially the game changers, the people that question what you're doing, the people that come up with alternative ideas because they've been able to pass through this filter and this funnel. You should be bringing other types of people into your internships, not just college people. And we're starting to get some traction with that. We're working directly with a company called Bentley Systems that has offices all over the world that's willing to give people college-level internships for college-level jobs that they can earn without getting the degree because they understand the value of those kinds of people. And we're getting more and more. We'll have more announcements about that later, but we're really starting to bang that drum. And I can do it, again, because of my perspective. I can talk to them from the employer side. So that's something to keep an eye out for. Don't just assume that internships are only for college people. We have found other companies out there, too, that will provide internships. On entrepreneurship, you've heard about this, I'm sure. You talk about people like, Richard Branson is an amazing entrepreneur and he has ADHD and dyslexia, or David Neeleman, or the list goes on and on of all the famous people you've heard of. That can be daunting for your young adults. Well, I can never be Richard Branson. So we created a website that actually called necessarybrilliance.org. It's just a website with stories on it. And it's about people that have found success that you probably haven't heard of, and some of the hacks and the techniques that they used to get to where they got to. Some have completed college, some have not, and they're all pursuing careers that they're passionate about. So if you go there, you can click and listen and read some of the stories and some of the interviews. If you know somebody that you think should be on there, let us know. We'd like to add to it. But we think it's a great kind of neutral website that just shows success stories for people that we understand. So for entrepreneurship, if somebody is young and wants to try a new idea and create a business from it, what a learning opportunity to do right out of high school. It's probably going to fail, right? Most startups do, especially if you're right out of high school. But what a learning opportunity to figure out if it's something that you can get passionate about. So I would say if your son or daughter says, I really want to try this, maybe you make that their gap year. Let them try it. Give them some money to fund it. It's not college tuition, but it may be money better spent. And let them try it and figure it out. They will learn so much by going through the process. So that's just a thought. You can also work for a startup. You don't have to create a startup to be in the startup world, and startups are cool because they have hours and excitement that match well with what ADHDers like. The hours are crazy, some early, some late. The excitement is there, and they get to do all kinds of different things in a small company startup environment. So if you can crack, yourself into a startup, it's a great opportunity. And lastly, you don't have to be the CEO to be an entrepreneur. There's lots of people working at startups that are entrepreneurs that aren't the CEO. So don't let that be the intimidator for you. Then job training. The balance between the cost of college and the income that people are going to get is starting to shift, kind of like the housing crisis a number of years ago, where the value of the asset is greater than what it's worth in the long term. So keep in mind that there's a lot of companies popping up to do very specialized training, which, again, ADHDers like because it's right to the point. If I want to code software, I can go to General Assembly, learn how to code, and get a job. If I'm an artist and I want to get into the gaming industry as an artist, I can go to a place like Sin Studios in Montreal and build my skills. And if I'm good and I can become world-class at it, I could potentially get a job as an artist in the gaming industry. There are culinary schools that are out there. Community colleges are very good at teaching that. The list goes on and on. I don't have enough time here to give you a huge list, but you can Google it and find other examples. But don't forget the trades. The trades right now, electrician, plumber, it's a shortage. Every plumber I know has retired before they're 50. And they're on a nice big boat down in Florida having the time of their lives, and they set their own schedule. They work their own hours. They show up when they want. Usually they don't show up at all. So don't underestimate the trades. That is a real opportunity. So it's a lot to pack into 40 minutes, but I wanted to at least give you an overview of another way to think about the process of how to find a path for somebody in your family that may be struggling to figure it out, or yourself. So help your son or daughter figure out the why. That's important. If you can figure out the why, then there's a great chance that you can go off and do something successful. Help pick a career that's in their sweet spot, and understand that college is only one of the many paths to success. It may take longer than their peers to get there, but that's okay. If you're successful in your 40s and doing what you love and making money and you have a roof over your head, whether it's a mansion or a tent, nobody's going to ask you when you finished your college degree or when you actually, got things together and made yourself successful. So it might take a little bit of patience along the way as well. And I would say together, we can provide pathways to success for our kids, and we can reduce the anxiety of moving to adulthood if they can see the career and the direction they want to go as opposed to only college. And by doing so, I think we can't stop wasting this necessary brilliance.
Thank you so much. That's really inspirational, Rick. Thanks. A question here, which is really an excellent follow-up. In terms of the got to try things to find your passion, two qualities that are pretty consistently found among ADHDers are, one, the difficulty of getting started, and two, the fear of failure. So Jennifer wants to know what your advice is to address those two impediments among teens, especially in terms of getting out there and trying things.
Yeah, fear of failure. I'll start with that one. That's usually the reason they don't get started. Right, is the fear of failure.
Right.
And we see that. It's a spotlight almost when you commit to something. So sometimes committing to something means that you're going to put yourself in the spotlight. And if there's a potential for failure, then that could result in more shame. Therefore, why would I start? So right. I think a big thing to understand is if you look in the literature and you look out there and you look at any business person that's done startups, et cetera, failure is just by definition what happens. You will fail along the way. Everybody has had failures along the way. As long as you learn from them and look at them as a learning opportunity and a learning experience, and can kind of convince them that, if they do fail, for example, and you're thinking of berating them for failing, think about turning it around to make it's a learning experience. Well, what did we learn from that? Yeah, so if you learned something, it wasn't a failure, we always say. If you don't learn something from your failure, then maybe it was a failure. So overcoming the fear of failure is let them know it's a learning opportunity, give them examples of people that have failed, and then to get them started, it's a lot of procrastination hacks out there. For example, one of the ones that I use, like when I want to write a presentation like the one I just gave, is I take pencil to paper and hold my pencil there and say, go. And I just start it. And then things start to flow. So for me, that works, but it doesn't work for everybody. So I think finding a way to start is individualized, but I think the biggest thing that keeps them from starting is fear of failure.
Agree. Yeah. It sounds like you may be in favor of the you can do anything for 15 minutes strategy also. You'll set a timer.
Yeah, all those. Yeah. They're all over Attitude in the website, right? So you can go there and try a bunch of them. And find the one that works for you. And it's awesome when you find it.
A suggestion here from a listener who says that Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx, has a great YouTube video on the fear of failure and how her parents asked her at the end of every week what she failed at and why failing was important because she was trying new things. So it's an interesting tip from a listener.
Awesome.
Yeah, really awesome. A question here about whether classic vocational assessment or career assessment tools are helpful. So, whether that be Woodcock-Johnson or some of the other testing that's out there in terms of expertise or skills. What's your point of view on that?
Yeah, so we do a lot of that just to start the list. I mean, you can think with ADHDers, it's funny. We ask folks on our side to come up with 50 business ideas or 50 career ideas. And if you ask a normal person that question, they're going to go, oh my gosh, that's a lot. You ask somebody that's ADHD, it's like, seriously, that's it? That's all you got? So for them, the big challenge is not generating enough career ideas. It's whittling down the career ideas. So we like those tools to kind of help them figure out the things that maybe they're not going to be good at. So if, some of those tools can tell you can't do this certain thing, back from that, you can then start to whittle away that list of career ideas like I was talking about. So think of it as not as an additive tool, but maybe a subtractive tool.
Very interesting. Okay. Do you have any advice for career changers, adults who are thinking about making a career change?
Yeah, so I think even more so, you're probably making a career change because you're not in something you're passionate about. You're maybe in a work environment that doesn't work for you. And I think the advantage that you have over somebody that's just coming out of high school is you have some real world experience and probably some scars from it. And you can start to learn, in an experiential way, what works for you and what does not. So if you were in a cubicle environment from 8 to 5 and that was torture for you, well, you should look for careers kind of in the methodology that I just described. Look for careers where that environment doesn't exist. A classic one, if you wanted to work in tech and there's a cubicle company and then there's Google with their kind of work environments, which one are you going to pick? So I think it's from your experience, figure out where you really struggled in those particular careers, and that becomes the subtractive part of the list. If you start coming up with potential careers that you could take, subtract out all those things from your experiential elements, maybe use some of the career kind of assessment tools and narrow it down to some ideas. And if you can get into that sweet spot where you start to get excited, it's never too late to go to night school or go back or go to one of those career prep programs and, reset your career, because ultimately I mean, I've never been in a job that I haven't loved, which is hard to say, but I did that by design, by trying to find things that I knew would excite me. I need exciting jobs to be happy, and I've been able to find that. If that's something that you need to do, then I think you need to find that excitement and narrow it down to where you can find a position that really works for you.
Okay, very inspirational. There's a question here. This is just one of many questions along the following lines. Someone looking for guidance on the addictive nature of gaming screens. There are a number of parents here of kids who they just feel they can't get off the gaming track. He's asking how to reduce the impact of this technology and get some focus on trying other things on a career.
Well, I guess two things with that. I mean, that's a tough question, and there's a lot of research and literature out there about how to solve that and what it means and what the impacts are. I think it can be addictive and it can be destructive. I'll give an example. So when we very first started out, we did a tour of our office, and in the center of the office is a network gaming room with high-end gaming computers, and people that were considering coming into our program would walk through and see that and say, "Oh my gosh, you allow gaming?" And it's like, well, yes, that's part of who they are, and it's how they socialize and how they relate, and it's how they take a break and decompress. And but we think what's going to happen is that as you start to find other things to get passionate about, then they will not do gaming on those computers. They'll do other things. They'll do research. They'll do CAD. They'll do 3D modeling and design, and they'll do, Photoshop and things like that. Every single time, people coming into our program, they start out gaming, and then if you can insert things that they can get excited about and get passionate about beyond gaming, then that starts to fade away, and it takes on a more balanced part of their life. But the way I think you got to do that is try to find that really bright light of engagement that can get them beyond that. Now, that said, I know there are some that are saying, yeah, but that's not my son or my daughter. They're so locked into these games, I can't break them away. That's where I say it gets a little bit harder. Right. You've got to try to find a way to either, there's so many techniques out there. Again, I think there's probably many on Attitude as well, articles from people that have studied this in detail that could give a better answer than I could on that.
It is. It's a big problem, and as you say, there's a lot of literature about it. But
finding that bright light is potentially a way.
Yep. How involved should the parent be in creating the quote Venn diagram? Question from a listener.
I'm smiling because I think the parent has to provide the structure, right? So providing the structure of it is important. The way you can do it is in stealth mode, is by, maybe suggesting some of those programs that I talked about in the summer, or summer jobs or volunteer opportunities that they can get excited by. And that gets them out into the world, experiencing something, maybe in a business or in a nonprofit, or, just seeing what life is like outside of the house. So I think kind of in the background, kind of working on those elements of it. And the money thing, again, just having those conversations and getting them to think about that and understand that can be done around the dinner table sometimes. Right. That's, one part of the diagram that I think you can have a straight up conversation on. And then the world-class piece is motivate them to be their best in something, whatever it is. Let them go really excel in something. And if you can get those things to start to kind of converge on that sweet spot, then you at least have a better spot to start talking about next steps after they get out of high school.
Okay. Good question from Tammy. How do you balance being supportive of a child's passions and yet being honest about it not being a real career option? In other words, my son's goal is to be in the NFL. Yeah,
so people don't like saying it this way, but I can say it to you guys because you're parents for the most part. We always like the idea of a plan A and a plan B. So it's great to have the dream. You never want to crush that dream, because who knows? They could be that NFL star, or they could be that rock star. They could be the person they dream to become, because things like that do happen, or else there wouldn't be people out there doing it. But meanwhile, back at the ranch, you should have a plan B on how you make money. So somebody wants to be an actor on Broadway, they tend to wait tables in New York City. They go to where the jobs are and they wait tables to pay for their livelihood and then hope that they get the big hit. And that's kind of the plan A, plan B strategy in that scenario. But there are many other ways to create a plan B scenario, which is find something that they're passionate about that's maybe in an area related to their passion. So maybe it's, sports marketing or something related, personal trainer or something like that that's involved in athletics and kind of that side of the world. And then allow them to continue to pursue that dream. But it's always good to have a plan B. In the case of an NFL, ask them what's going to happen if they get an injury. That happens to people in high school and in college. And then where are they? So you need to have a plan B. But I would say don't say plan A and plan B to them because they've heard plan B and they hate that.
Right.
Couch it in a different way. Say it differently.
Okay. Interesting question from someone as to if your child has the option to go to a university or college setting that might be more close to what seems to be their passion versus one with an ADHD program, which is the better choice? So the question is, is it smart to go to a place that has an ADHD disability center or backup program?
I guess the way I'd break that down is there's obviously universities, and passions aligned with universities are certainly a good way to start as long as you're confident they can handle the 15, 18-hour credit loads and all the requirements that come from academics. There's also colleges and universities that specialize in ADHD adults, just specifically working with them. But then there's the middle ground where there's a lot of good schools that are out there that do have very strong SDRCs, the Disability Resource Centers for students, where they can get all the accommodations that they need. So it really depends, I'd say, on where your son or daughter is and needs of level of support. There are a couple programs out there that I will mention that we've heard of, like Mansfield Hall is one that we've had one of our young adults go to. They set up a kind of a supportive, executive functioning kind of support community in a dorm outside of a university. So they're in Burlington, Vermont, and also in Wisconsin. And every day they come back to that community, and then people help and make sure they're on track for staying on schedule to complete their colleges. That's an example of, one where you might need a little bit more help to get through the regular university environment.
Right.
So there's options like that. And it just depends where on the scale your son or daughter is as to what level of support they need. I will say that there are universities out there that allow you to customize your courses, a bunch of them, where you can customize your courses and customize your degree and avoid some of the boring core courses. And those tend to play really well with folks too. One of them is the University of Rochester, which is a really good school. And we know Lesley University here in Cambridge also is kind of design your own curriculum. Those can be really helpful for people too, as opposed to the rigid, like I went through engineering school, there were 2 years of classes that I had to take and pass to get to the third year. So it depends on your young adult and what they need for supports. But there's lots of different options out there that you can start researching.
Yeah, so thinking outside the box, definitely good advice. Do you have any experience, Rick, with military careers for ADHD folks?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, for people that really struggle with kind of finding a direction and a passion, sometimes military is a good option. So we've had a couple of people from our program join the military, and they've done very well in that regard, and we're passionate about it. And they get a lot of good job experience in the short term. But if it's not something that they really want to do, obviously it's hard to push. In our case, the two folks really thought that it was a great option for them.
Right. I mean, provides a lot of structure and, seems...
yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And they also, just quickly, they do tend to test well on the entrance test. So they do tend to get kind of a choice of where they could be deployed and what jobs they could do, which is nice.
That is great. So there's help there in the sense in terms of being put in the right job that would, I think if they're going to take someone in the military, they're going to try to place them somewhere where they're going to succeed. So, yeah, that's
exactly. And you can take the test in advance before you go get recruited and see how you do on the test score. So that is an option to try it before you commit.
Okay. Let's see. As a little bit more about gap years. A couple of questions about gap years. Do you think that a gap year that one person's worried about a gap year that has no academic component, is that a good idea? And a second question about gap year is, should the ADHD student live at home during a gap year or as part of the gap year experience to go out on your own and away from home?
Well, firstly, on the first question, I think gap years are a great opportunity to take like a community college course. So I would, most gap years you're in a location where there's a nearby community college, and that's a great way to get introduced into what the academic environment is going to be, in addition to the other things that you do in a gap year. So if you can do that, that's ideal. But as far as does it have to have an academic requirement, I think the more important thing is what do they come out of as a career path, and are they truly excited about it, and can they get into the right college and the right major? That should be the main outcome. But also, if they can test themselves out and take a few courses in a community college and maybe get some advanced credits, that's a win if you can do it. And then what was the second question? I wanted to get to that.
Living at home during a gap year versus...
Yeah. I would strongly advocate living away from home because if they live at home, they're not going to get the experience that I think many of them that we've seen need is how to boil water in some cases. I mean, it's sometimes that's what they need to learn, and they don't necessarily, if they haven't learned it by the time they get to us, they didn't learn it at home. and parents would be shocked. Really? You don't know how to boil water? Yeah, actually, I never learned that, Mom or Dad. So learning how to do laundry, how to cook, how to go grocery shopping, all those things that you have to learn concurrently with going to college can be overwhelming. So I think to get a really good solid gap year, part of that is they need to live away from home and build those skills themselves. They also, the big thing that we've found is true, they also struggle with roommates and conflict avoidance and how to handle conflict. And any good gap year that has a situation like that where they have residential will have roommate contracts and all the things that you do in college when you first start. Going through that in kind of a dry run and learning how to ask people to stop doing things that you don't like when you're not studying for that final exam the next day and they're getting on your nerves. All that learning happens kind of in a residential gap year. So I think they're good if you can pull it off and you can afford it, but they do cost more money.
Yeah, that's great. Rick, thank you so much. This has been incredibly interesting, incredibly inspirational. Thank you for this presentation. And everyone, I know you're probably going to want to listen to this. Again, some of you have asked about having your teens listen. It will be available on the Attitude website later today or tomorrow morning as soon as the file updates, and you'll be able to listen and download the slides in the same way as you have during the live webinar. So stay tuned for that. Next week we have John Rady talking about exercise and ADHD. This is a webinar that was rescheduled from a week or two ago. And on March 6th, Wednesday, A Parent's Guide to Changing Schools. How do you determine what the best school is to your child and whether you should make a change? So those are coming up. Hope you'll come back and take part in Attitude webinars. And again, thank you so much to Rick Fiery. It really was a great webinar. We appreciate it. Bye, everybody.
Thanks.